Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Luca and today I want to give you a crash course on components in Framer. Components are one of Framer's most powerful features as they allow you to do basically everything you can think of, from all sorts of animations, interactions and effects to even some logic. For example, you can use them to create multi-step forms or to create some filtering for your CMS collections. If you want to look at a couple of examples of components, you can go to my website at clicks.supply/resources, and here you will find a lot of components which are completely free to use. So you can take one you like, for example, let's say this one. You can preview it, and if you like it, you can remix it completely for free and see how it is made. For example, this one was made completely from components, so it gives you an idea of how to use components to create more advanced, in this case, animations and effects. But back to the video. Today I'm going to show you how to create these two components. The first one is going to be a button with two variants, one for the primary button and one for the secondary button. And they also have a little nice hover effect. As you can see here, the color changes a bit and also the arrow moves up. And this creating this button will allow you to understand 3 of the 4 quote-unquote pillars of components, which are variables, variants and states. And the 4th pillar is going to be interactions, which I'm going to explain by creating this simple toggle. As always, I will leave the remix link in the description below if you want to have some hands-on reference, and I think that was enough for the introduction, and let's start with our video. So let's start from the very beginning. We are going to create our first component from complete scratch. Let's first create a new page. We can call it page, that's alright. And theoretically you can turn basically everything into a component, even an entire page, which does have some use cases, but for now we are only going to create a simple button. So let's start by drawing a frame, which is going to be like the background of our button. We can make it black, so something like 13, 15 and 19. That's a good black. And now turn this frame into a component. We want to right click on it and select create component. We are asked to give it a name, which we are going to call it, let's say, CTA. And now if we click on create, here we are on the component window. Here it's a separate window that you can use to edit your component. There are a couple of things that we will explore. For example, this one allows you to create more variants, this one allows you to create more states. But for now, let's focus on our primary variant. As you can see here, you see which of the variants of the components you have is the primary. In this case, when you create a component, the first thing you have is going to be the primary, so keep this in mind. And now we can style this as we would with a normal component. So let's start by adding some text, get in touch. We are going to make this change the font to Manrop, change the weight, so semi-bold, the color to white, perfect. Maybe increase the size a bit, the line height as well, perfect. We want this to be centered. While we can do this with position absolute, usually it's a very good idea to have position relative. And to have a position relative here, you have to add some layout to the container. So let's add some layout. We can leave it as it is. Actually, let's change the direction to horizontal so that when we add the icon, it will be on the right of the component instead of on the top or the bottom. So now let's change the width and height. We can set it to fit and we are going to create some padding here, for example 15 on top and bottom and 30 on right and left. That's alright. Let's change some, let's decrease the gap a bit and maybe give some radius. And here we have our button. We also need the icon, so we can go to insert and search for phosphor. Here we have our icons. We are going to make it a bit smaller, like 17 pixels. We're going to make it white as well. So here we go. And we can change the variable to arrow up right. Awesome. Maybe you can even change the weight to bold. And here we have the primary variant of our component. Now we are going to look at the very first, let's call it topic related to components, which are going to be states. There are two states that you have for each component, which are hover and pressed. To add one, you select the variant you want to add the state to, because you can add different states to different variants. We are going to explore this in a second. But so you select the one you want to create a state for, go below here where you have this box, click on it, and here you can choose the state you want. In this case we want the hover state. And here basically you can make all the changes that you want, and they will only be visible when the state is triggered. For example, here it will be triggered on hover. So as an example, if I change this to, let's say, red, and I try to preview my component here on the page, as you can see, the primary variant of the component didn't change, but if we hover over it, you can see that you can basically do whatever you want with the new hover state, because the changes will only take place once the state is triggered. So in our case, I'm going to reset the override, and we can change as we want. I'm going to lower the opacity a bit. Perfect. We can reset the rotate. I don't know why it was. When you see something purple here, it means that the style is different from the primary variant. And if you don't want it to be different, you can just click on it and do a reset override. And so we want the opacity to be slightly lower, but also we want to move the arrow a bit on the top and on the right. This cannot be done when you are using position relative, but can only be done when you have position absolute. However, if we now try to set the position absolute, you can see that the component collapses, because this is not regarded as, let's say, part of the button. So it doesn't get count for the padding, so that's not what we want. So I'm going to undo this. And as a trick in these situations, you can take the part you want to edit with position absolute, and you want to create a container for it. So let's call this container. Container. Perfect. Again, we want to give some layout, and the width and height we can leave it as it is. One important thing is that you want overflow to visible. You are going to understand why in a second. And now we can change this type from position relative to position absolute. And because we now have a container that works as a placeholder inside our button, the padding will still be in place, and now we can move this around however we want without changing the size of our component. So now that we've done it, we can go down here. We can remove these constraints from left and bottom, and I'm going to increase these two slightly, actually decrease the top value and increase decrease again the right value. And here we go. Here we have moved our arrow from the center of the container to the top right, and this animation will take place only when you hover the button, so when the state is triggered. Let's try to preview this, and here we go. As you can see, the arrow moves smoothly from the center of the container to the top right. I mentioned that having overflow set to visible is extremely important. That's because if we have the container and we set the overflow to be hidden, everything that overflows the container will be cut off, so half of the arrow will not be visible, which is not what we want. So I'm going to reset the override to be visible so that we can see the whole arrow. The second state there is for every component is the pressed state, and you can add it exactly as you added the overstate. So you can go here and change the overstate as you want. So for example, I can set this to white and set the content to black. Here we go. Same here. 14, 15, 19. And now here is the first state, so the hover state, and if I click now I see the second state, which is going to be the pressed state. So for now we have covered what a component is and what a state is. Now let's look at variables. Before I introduce variables, let's see why they are so useful. So let's say that I have this component here and I want to use it to not only get in touch, not only to make people get in touch with me, but I also want to use it, for example, for allowing people to purchase something. So if I duplicate the button and I double click on it, I can edit the component. And if I try to edit it here, so for example, purchase, let's say book a demo, actually. Awesome. Now I tried to change the text, but if I go back, you can see that every instance of the component has changed the text. That's because components are by nature of things reusable. So if you duplicate it and you double click on any of these, then you will be taken to our component, to our, let's say, main component, which is going to be the CTA. So you have a component and you have instances. The component is, you can think of the component as the cookie cutter. So they give the shape to all the cookies, in this case instances, but all the instances will be exactly as the cookie cutter, which is going to be our component. So regardless of how many instances you have, they will always be equal to the component you created. However, components are a bit more flexible than cookie cutters, and so you can specify variables. Variables are small changes, let's say small changes that you can make. Variables are like values that you can pass to each instance of the component to make it slightly different than the primary component. So for example, if I select the text here and I go to content, you can see that I can either set it statically, or there is an arrow here just on the left of content. If I try to press it, it asks me to create a variable. I can create a variable, in this case I'm going to use plain text, and I can call this, let's say, copy. And now I have a variable that I can use to choose what I want to display as the content. So instead of changing the text here, I'm going to use the variable for each of the instances. For example, this one I want to be schedule a call. Perfect. The second one can be book a demo. I can duplicate it again and be, for example, let's say get in touch. Duplicate again, sorry, enroll now. And as you can see, the variable only has an effect on the instance of the component rather than all the components. So what you set here will only have effect on the instance you are editing rather than all the instances of the component. So we can delete this. And another very useful variable that we want for our component is whether or not where we want the link to take us. So again, we can either go here, set link, and then use this arrow, this button, sorry. Otherwise, we can use the variables here in the top left. And here I have all the variables of the component. In this case, we only have one, so we can add a new one using this button here on the top right. And there are a bunch of possible alternatives, but we are going to use the link in this case. We can leave it as link. And now I can select the primary variant. When you select the primary variant, remember that the changes you make here will also affect the other variants and also the states. So for example, if I set the link here to be the variable, so always selecting the button here, we can go to the variables we have here and select the link. And so the link we set here, as you can see here, we have this small icon that tells us that this button has a link. It also has taken effect on all the other variants, on all the other states, sorry, of our component. So bear this in mind when you are making edits to the primary component. And we can also choose whether we want to open a new tab or not. So again, we can create variable and choose if we want the user to open a new tab or not. So now when we have our component, we can choose the copy, so book a demo, and we can choose where we want to bring them. For example, if I want to bring them to my homepage without opening a new tab, or if I want to, let's say, connect on Twitter, I can give a link, so https x.com. And in this case, I want to open a new tab, so I can just choose new tab. And now we have the same component with the same style, but it does completely different things. One allows you to go back to the home page without opening a new tab, and the second one brings you to the to x.com and allows you to open a new tab. So we have covered how to create a component. We have covered states, we have covered variables. Now let's look at variants. So looking back at our homepage, we have two variants of our component. The primary one with the black background and the white text, and the other one, which is going to be this one with the let's say the ghost button with no background, the border, and the black text. So in this case, we don't need to create a new component for this, but rather we can take the one we already have and create a variant. A variant is basically another cookie cutter, but with some changes that you have made. So for example, I can go here and create a new variant. We can call this secondary. I'm also going to rename the first one to primary. Awesome. And now we can make changes to the secondary variant of our component without affecting the primary one. So for example, I can remove the fill, add a border, the usual border we have, and I'm going to make it 30%, and we can change the color here as well. I can use this tool here to make things faster. And now we have another variant of our component. It behaves exactly as the primary one, so I can, for example, add a hover state and make changes to this one that are not going to affect the, let's say, the primary variant. So now, again, I can duplicate this. And now, between the other things, I can also choose the variant. In this case, we want the secondary. And all the variables we have set previously will work on the other variants as well. That's why I was mentioning that when you make a change on the primary variant of your component, you are also going to affect all the other variants. As you can see, we have the same variables. So bear this in mind. And yeah, that's basically it. We now have our two components. They both have the hover state and the press state. They have variables that allow you to change the instance of a component rather than all the instances of a component. And now we are going to explore the last, let's say, concept that you need to understand when we are talking about components, which is going to be interactions. Okay, so let's now look into interactions. To make the tutorial a bit shorter, I've already created a copy of our toggle with the basic design. So let me actually remove these two buttons. And it basically has nothing. It only has the first design of the component, which is going to be the designer. Now we want to create the second variant of our component, which is going to be the developer option of the toggle. One thing to know is that interactions work based on variants. So if you want to have an interaction, you will need at least two variants. So keep this in mind. Let's create our new variant, which is going to be the developer. Let's call it this way. The first thing we want to do is to make let's say the option, the white part of the toggle go from the end of the container to the start. So we can change the distribution from end to start. Awesome. We also want to change the icon from pen to code. And finally, I'm going to change the color from purple to light blue, which is going to be 90E0EF. Awesome. Now, so what we want to do now is to allow the user to click on our toggle and to switch between these two variants. So when the user clicks on designer, it will be taken to developer. And when he clicks on developer, we want to change the variant back to designer. So to do this, we want to add a new interaction. So interactions are here in the top right. I can click on add new, and I'm going to use the new transition. For now, you don't have to worry about events. Events are something you will rarely use. At least I never use them. I don't use them in most projects. So for now, let's keep it simple and let's go with a new transition. And now I can select the trigger for the new transition, for the new interaction. In this case, we have click start, appear, mouse enter, mouse leave. Mouse enter is so if the user goes in with the mouse, then it will trigger the interaction. Mouse leave is when the user goes out, it will trigger the interaction. Appear when the toggle first appear on the page. Click start when the click starts, and click instead gets triggered, basically the same as click, but it also includes let's say click end. So click is awesome for now. We don't want it to cycle, but rather to be a one-time interaction. And we want to change the variant from designer to developer. So here we go. We also have to add the same transition, but the other way around. So as you can see, the transition I set for the primary component has also have an effect on the developer, because as you can see, we already have the same interaction here, because as I was mentioning, when you make a change to the primary component, it will also affect all the other variants. So the interaction is actually right. We just want to change the variant from developer to designer, and now it should be all good. If we now try to preview, we can switch between the two variants, and it works exactly as we wanted. I'm just going to also show you real quick how to use another interaction. Let's say the appear one. After 3 seconds from when the designer appears, I want it to go to the developer variant. So let's try and preview this. 1, 2, 3. Let's go. It has changed. We can also make it cycle. So here I can go to cycle, and now it should go back and forth on a loop. As you can see, let's wait another few seconds. And here we go. Now our toggles moves in a cycle, in a loop, and goes from one variant to the other every 3 seconds. So this was basically it for the components. We have covered all the basics. We have covered the variants, we have covered states, we have covered the variables, and we have covered interactions. If you liked the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. If you have any questions or any topics you would want me to cover, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next one.